So myself and Phoebe are going to introduce ourselves first, and then I'm going to do the first half of the talk, and then Phoebe will join for the second half after. So I'm Dr. Alexandra Lautarescu. I'm a postdoctoral research associate in neuroimaging, which might come as a surprise to you because my work has absolutely nothing to do with bots. You might wonder why I'm speaking about it today. And the main reason is because I think people are not speaking about it enough. And I think there's not a lot of awareness in research communities around it yet. And I'm joined today by Phoebe, who can introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Phoebe. I'm a PhD student in psychosis studies. And again, I never thought I'd be dealing with bots either. So I'll tell you a bit more about my experience later on in the talk.
All right, thank you so much, Phoebe. So yeah, I guess similar to how Angelica had a slide on this in her talk about how did this end up happening. So Phoebe and I had a chat at a workshop a few weeks ago and realized that we're both facing the same problem. So I've just invited Phoebe to come and join me today to give her perspective as well, just as an additional way to show that this is not an isolated issue. We will have time for questions at the end, but if anything is super unclear, people are struggling to follow along with anything, or if I'm speaking too fast, which I tend to do put your hand up and ask any questions in the meantime as well. So I'm the principal investigator of a study called WANDA, which stands for Wellbeing Across Neurotypes, Depression and Anxiety. And it's a study where we look at perinatal mental health experiences, primarily in neurodivergent people. And we ran an online survey. We distributed the survey through various means. I'll talk about that in a bit. And a few hours after sharing the survey online, realized, well, initially we got excited. We're like, oh, people are clicking our link. This is great. And then a few hours in, when we had a few hundred responses, we were like, oh, I think something's wrong. I don't think these are real responses. Went on Reddit, because that's what you do when you have questions. Used to go on Twitter, but not a very welcoming place anymore. And turns out a lot of people are having the same issue. Turns out a lot of people are struggling to figure out whether the data that they have is actually real data. And obviously, Angelica spoke about, p-hacking, which is you have your data and what you do with that data after and whether that might impact the validity of your research findings. What I'm speaking about is the data that you're actually working with in the first place coming from real people? So it's just a step before all that. So how did I know that bots infiltrated my survey? So I had 288 responses within a few hours. A lot of them had the exact same as start and end date, and a bunch of other things that made me sort of question their validity. I immediately paused data collection and I started looking at my data to see what can we do about it. Wasn't very worried initially because I have, so my survey was sort of mixed methods. I had mostly multiple choice questions, but I did have some open-ended questions. And I was like, I'm sure bots can't answer open-ended questions, so I'm sure I can just very easily exclude them. So this is an example of one of the open-ended questions I had. So why have you chosen to take part in research? And one of the answers was desire to contribute to the understanding of pregnancy-related medical conditions. Sounded legit, looks good to me. But then when I looked at other responses, a bunch of them that had started around the same time started with desire to start a family, desire to contribute to the understanding of blah, blah, blah. Quite unlikely that a bunch of real people will all start with the exact same sort of wording. Then another example, what other research questions should researchers focus on? So a good example was effect of maternal mental health on child development. Similar, perfectly fine in isolation, but then when you start looking at the other answers, you get a bunch of others as well. Started getting a bit worried at this point. And if it was just this would have been straightforward. If all of these answers match, they're most likely bot generated. Let's exclude these people. But not all of them followed a pattern. So you did have answers that were dissimilar to everything else. They You didn't have any identifiable pattern.
Pause.
Pause. Are we good for AC?
We're on it for AC, so just bear with me. But
Yeah.
I just made a schoolboy error by
Oh, no,
not
it's
sharing the slides.
Sorry, people online. We will have the slides on OSF.
This is
Yeah. So hopefully people can see them now. Yeah.
sorry about that.
That's all right. Just to say, there wasn't anything massive on the slides other than just some memes of Kermit the Frog that you may have missed. Right. So not all of the responses followed a pattern. So we had, responses like safety of medications during pregnancy, which sounds, to me, sounds like a real person. But then we did have some that, for the lack of a better word, sounded a bit ChatGPT generated, like relationship between maternal exposure to volatile organic compounds and childhood allergies. You could potentially have a mom who is a chemist who speaks like this, but probably unlikely. Then another example, why have you chosen to take part in research? So again, we had some responses that sounded quite plausible. Importance of contributing to scientific research, interest in comparing my own pregnancy experiences with others, etc. So I did what all of us do when we have an issue with our research, which is look at the literature, go on Google Scholar, see have people faced this issue, and if yes, what did they do about it? Well, didn't really find a solution, which is, I would say, the main takeaway of my talk today. For a bit of context, a lot of us, I'm assuming, do or have done some online data collection at some point. It's fast, it's low cost, we can access a lot of hard to reach populations. We don't have to drag participants to our lab. It's a bit easier on us as well, time-wise. But then we can have some issues. Not all of them are bot related, but you can have, inattention, duplicate responses. You can have identity fraud, so people lying about their demographics to meet eligibility criteria. And all of these can obviously increase your risk of type 1 and type 2 errors. And I just added some information here about fraudulent responses. So you can have unique participant fraud. So this would be someone completing the survey 5 times. You can have alias fraud, so they're pretending to be someone else. So what I said earlier, lying about your demographics, for example. And you can have a combination of the two. So someone doing that multiple times, each time with different responses. So bots pose a serious and very much increasing threat to the integrity of scientific data, which is why, from my point of view, conversations like these should happen within open research spaces. Do we have issues? That's all right.
Shared the wrong bloody thing.
Oh no.
So just bear with me. Just bear with me.
It's all right.
Alex is my long-suffering colleague who
Yeah.
has to bear with my
Fine.
shoddy, tardy. I'll just share the screen.
Yeah, share the screen, and because I don't have
And then-
notes. So
Yeah. Okay.
um,
Right. This is what you're on notes?
yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess people have to look online for
Playing
the Kermit the
games
Frog
too.
memes that you have now missed. I'm not going back to them. Right, so bots pose a serious and increasing threat to the integrity of scientific data. In terms of the definition of bot, because I guess that's a good starting point, it's usually a computer software designed by a human programmer to perform automated tasks. So that would be, in this case, finding and completing online surveys that offer participant incentives most of the time. We don't really know the prevalence of this. But from a study in 2020, they were saying that only 60% of internet activity could be attributed to human users. So that's in 2020. So probably now less than half would be my assumption. Obviously, they waste researchers' time. We don't always plan to spend months trawling through our data trying to exclude these bots, and can further decrease public trust in science. We've had a lot of conversations about how open research practices are necessary because the public trust in science is decreasing. And now this is adding another element of complexity onto it. It has become more and more difficult over the years to discern bots from human participants. And that is largely because of large language models. So things like ChatGPT. So they can now be integrated within these bot softwares. They can fill out the surveys using human-like answers, so like the examples that I've shown you before. And a lot of these answers can be very plausible. They're not always, some of the ones I've shown you were copy-pasting the same sentence structure, but a lot of them were not. And you know, they can generate fake names, background, demographic information, and pretty much create realistic personas that to you, in reading these responses, sound like real people. They can also, and this will be evident further along in my talk, spot traps. So things that we might have like attention checks are now pretty easy to bypass by bots. So I will give some suggestions in this talk. They may be helpful for now if you're doing online research. They might not be helpful for long because they will probably find ways to bypass these as well. It's not a very optimistic talk, so I apologize for that. So the three things that I'm going to focus on is knowing how to protect your data from being infiltrated by bots in the first place, knowing what constitute evidence of bots in the data that you do have, and then obviously removing them and reporting that. And I've given an example from a study that is completely unrelated to my area of expertise. There's a beekeeper survey. I don't fully know what it was about, but they just included this this table where they were comparing the valid responses to the fraudulent responses, and I just put it as an example. So, you know, 102 participants responded to this question, 2,500 bots responded to this question, and you can see the difference in the means and standard deviations between the valid and fraudulent responses. So if you're not identifying them and removing them, these will obviously massively skew your results. So the three papers that I've added on the left are the ones that I've used as sort of guidelines in my bot exclusion criteria. And very interestingly, Phoebe, when I spoke to her, used very different ones. So we came to the same problem from very different angles, but ended up with similar solutions. I asked ChatGPT if we can confidently identify and exclude bot responses, and it said no, which is not a surprise. So my talk is going to be based on this bot prevention, detection, and exclusion strategy that I developed for my Wanda project, which I have put on OSF. The reason why I've put this on OSF is that, well, obviously I want to be transparent about it in the research studies that I'm going to publish using the Wanda data, so I can then say, I've excluded bots from the data. Here's my supplementary material. Have a look at how I've done it. The alternative would have been to write a paper about it, like these people on the left have done. The ethical question about that, though, is if we write papers with these suggestions, will bot programmers read these papers and then design strategies to bypass them? So I've parked the idea to write a paper for now. Until, I don't know, we find a solution. So for now, I guess my purpose in my career, other than what I'm doing day to day, which is neuroimaging, is to just go around and tell people about bots face to face, like I'm doing today. Right, so how do we stop bots in the first place? So unfortunately, there's no perfect strategy to detect them once they've entered your study. So the best strategy is prevention, trying to keep them up in the first place. So my main advice would be to use different links for different recruitment strategies, because that way, if one of your recruitment avenues gets infiltrated by bots, you can isolate that data set and then keep the other ones on if they're still fine, and then you can work on detecting within that one spreadsheet. So for example, if you use a platform like Qualtrics, you can just duplicate your survey, generate multiple links, and then at the end, you get multiple databases, you merge them together once you've excluded the bots, and you analyze your data that way. Know that if you do use social media for recruitment, bots are pretty much inevitable. Some platforms are more sort of dangerous than others. And make sure you do immediately close down any link that is infiltrated by bots and replace it with a new link. And I will explain why in a second as well. So this is a bit of a busy slide, so bear with me. You don't have to sort of remember any of this. It's just to talk you through how it worked for me. So I've named all of my sort of different links as waves, like wave 1 of recruitment, wave 2 of recruitment. So wave 1 is what I've already spoken about. We put the link, I think, on Twitter is where it got attacked. It got infiltrated by those 200-ish bots that I've told you about, and we closed down the link a few hours later. 10 out of those participants ended up real, 277 ended up being bots. The 10 participants were at the start before it got infiltrated, and then pretty much every single response after was a bot. Then we had to stop. We had to do an ethics amendment, which is why main takeaway number 2, make sure you think about these things in advance so that your ethics can cover it, because otherwise you will have to apply for amendments if you want to obviously make any changes to your recruitment. So I made a change, which was instead of having this link be public on Twitter, a bit annoying for participants, a bit annoying for me, but it is what it is. It has my email address. Anyone who wants the link to the survey emails me, asks me for the link, I send them the link. I was like, this is great. I will talk about this in a few slides, but you can do something with Qualtrics, and I'm sure with other platforms as well, where you generate individual links for individual participants. And that helps you see if that same link was used multiple times, it pops up with a warning, so you can know that. So yes, I've had people reach out to me, around, I think 10 emails is what I've had. Well, no, 13 emails, because those are real people, asking me for a link. And then one person emailed, asked for the link, I gave them the link, and that link ended up being used 400-ish times. Obviously I could spot it easily because I have set it up in that way. Closed that down, started the wave 3 email link. I was a bit more careful about where I've shared that, in terms of I didn't put it back on Twitter because I just realized Twitter was sort of the main culprit. And that link ended up being open until the end of data collection. Then I had wave 2 offline and word of mouth. So this was a link that never made it to social media. It was a link that was written down on the flyers that you see around campus. It was a link that people may send in WhatsApp messages to other friends that they might have that are pregnant. We used word of mouth recruitment. So we said to participants, if you think anyone else might be eligible for the study, you can send them this link. Please don't share it on social media. That ended up being fine, didn't get infiltrated. Then we had wave 2 website, which is just, we had our study website. We had the link on the website. Interestingly, bots didn't manage to find the website. So that seems to be a good way to prevent it. Again, I don't know for how long, but at least in my case, that seemed to be fine. So I had my study flyers that had the study website. Participants went onto the website and then navigated things in the website to find the page that has the survey. So I guess that adds a few more complexity steps for the bots. And then the last one is what I've noted there as wave 3 bot trap, which was basically what I've done after the second wave of sort of email links that I've sent. When I set up wave 3, I just set up a separate link where I was like, if I get an email that I think is a bit suspicious, I'm not going to give them the main link. I'm just going to give them this sort of bot trap link so they can be directed into a separate version of the survey. And the reason why I've done that is if they're real people, when I look at their data, they're going to be fine. But obviously, if they're bots, they're not going to ruin my whole survey again. I'm not going to have to close it down again. So as you can see, a lot more complicated than I was planning initially. So bot prevention strategy. So I'm just going to be talking a bit about the things you could do to prevent bot responses in the first place. So this slide is referring specifically to features that you have within Qualtrics as a platform, but again, you can have those in RedCap and a bunch of other survey platforms as well. So prevent indexing is a feature that prevents your survey from appearing in search results. And prevent multiple submissions is It basically just prevents people from accessing the link from the same computer or browser multiple times. And the way I coded it was that those attempting to take the survey more than one time from the same computer and browser would get an error message saying you've already taken the survey. The advantage of that is that obviously it keeps some bots out. The disadvantage of that is that they learn that this is a feature of your survey. They learn that if they try to do this, they're going to get kicked out. They just use things like VPNs to fake different IP addresses and avoid it. Monetary incentives seem to be a big thing. So bot programmers obviously have a reason for why they do this. And most of the time it's money. So if you do give money to your participants, do it carefully. Fraud does seem to be more prevalent when you give out higher amounts of money. But that doesn't mean you're safe if you're not giving your participants money, because sometimes bot programmers use these surveys as a way to improve their bots programming. So they say, oh, okay, this bot is not, this study doesn't have monetary incentives. It's probably not as like well protected as a study that would. So you can just set our bots loose on it. They can get some training so that they can be better at surveys that do have monetary incentives in the future. Obviously, you would exhaust your research funds if you're ending up paying bot programmers for data that is invalid and is unusable. You can do a lottery draw, which is what I did. So I said, I have this many vouchers of £10, this many vouchers of £20, and one voucher of £100. It can work, but the issue with that is that it can actually end up backfiring and attracting more fraudulent responses, because the bot programmers are trying to increase their chances of winning this prize. So if they do the survey 500 times, they're probably going to have a better chance of getting one of these vouchers. If you do end up using monetary incentives, do it carefully. You can, if your ethics allows it. I didn't have ethics for that. So in my ethics, I said, we will make no attempt to identify you from the data that you're providing, which means that we couldn't look at their email addresses to link them to their responses. But if your ethics allows for that, most of the times they obviously have email addresses that are quite nonsensical, but again, so could real people. And sometimes they use temporary email addresses, so not things that you may be familiar with, like Gmail or anything like that. You can do a similar thing with IP addresses. Again, in my ethics, I said we will not collect IP addresses because we don't want to identify you. But you could make this argument to your ethics committee and say we will collect IP addresses so that we can identify bots. Again, they can fake this with VPNs. Do not automate payments. So make sure that before you send money to your research participants, you can do this in a sort of more structured way where you have control over it. And something that I haven't done but is good practice, include a stipulation in your ethics that any responses that are identified as bots will be excluded from the raffle, because otherwise, if you don't do this, you will have to pay your bots for infiltrating your study. And lastly, make it more difficult to access these incentives if you're not a human. So what I did, which again, a bit overly complicated, but it is what it is that I had my main survey that was collecting the data, and then I had a separate survey that was collecting the email addresses for the raffle. So I had the second survey that had was collecting email addresses, was password protected. And the password to that was appearing at the end of the first survey. And the reason why I did that was that otherwise a bot could infiltrate the first survey, do the survey once, get the link to the survey where they can give their email addresses, and then give like 80 email addresses to be included in the raffle. I've mentioned this before, avoid advertising on social media if you can. My experience was that Twitter was infiltrated immediately. Private Facebook groups may be okay. So in my example, I just reached out to private, local groups of mums in my local area that are closed and shared the link there, and that seemed to be fine. I also used Instagram ads and Facebook ads, and weirdly, those were not infiltrated. they did link to the website, not to the survey directly. So that might be it, but I don't have an example of a sort of definitive answer to that. And as I've said, if you're using Snowball or word of mouth recruitment, ask participants not to share the link on social media. If you do use social media, use it carefully, use a different flyer, ask people to email you for a link, give out personalized one-time use only links, as I said. Now, the question that has a bit of a sort of ethics implication side point to it is, what do you do with disingenuous emails? So in the literature, they talk about disingenuous emails as being emails where the subject lines may be poorly written or nonsensical, where you may have keywords from your study ad in the subject line, you may have generic statements, or the body message of the email is left blank, or it has poor grammar. However, if you're getting one of these emails and you're just automatically excluding them, or you're ignoring them because you're like, oh, okay, this email has poor grammar, it must be a bot, you're obviously running the risk of excluding real people. So in my example, my study was recruiting neurodivergent people. If someone has dyslexia, their email, yes, might have some grammar mistakes in them. It doesn't mean they're a bot programmer. So you obviously don't want to do that either. So this is why I use the sort of separate link if they met any of these criteria. This would be my biggest advice for prevention and exclusion, would be if you include open text responses and make them compulsory. So less sophisticated bots won't be able to complete open text responses. So if they're compulsory, they'll just leave your survey because they can't get past that question. More sophisticated bots will go through, but you have a better chance at identifying them if you have some actual text rather than if you just have multiple choice. The downside to that is that it might annoy some real participants, as you see in one of these examples in my data. So you're not going to be able to prevent them all. So once they've infiltrated your data, what do you do about it? So in my view, I think there are two main types of bots. You have basic bots that you can pretty much identify with traditional strategies, like the things that you read about in the literature, the things that I'm telling you about today. And then you have sophisticated bots that are very much able to bypass all of these strategies. You're going to need to consider multiple criteria in parallel, and exclusion is unfortunately going to be more of a subjective judgment than an objective one. So, main takeaway, again, do not make decisions based on a singular criteria. So don't say, okay, I'm just looking at this one thing and going to base my decisions on the basis of it. So what I've done, again, very, I guess, not particularly literature based, but just from my own experience, I've developed high confidence criteria where I was like, okay, if they've met this criteria, I'm quite confident that these are bots, not real people. And I've considered excluding them if they met one or more of these criteria. Then I had medium confidence criteria. I was like, oh, they might be bots if they do this. I'm not 100% sure. I will consider excluding them if they meet multiple of these criteria. And then I had green flags, which was reading an open text response and being like, there's no way this is a bot. This is a real person. It reads like a real person. They just swore at me, or whatever it could be. So then, even if they did meet some of the criteria that made me think they're bots, I would most of the time keep them in the data because from my subjective judgment, this is a real person. So I'm gonna go through them now. I'm not gonna go into a huge amount of detail, but I'm just gonna sort of list them and how they relate to my data. So high confidence criteria. Using the same link multiple times. So I've already spoken about this. If you're providing a personalized link via email, it should only be used once. If it's used multiple times, this is most likely a bot. So you can see in my Wave 2 email link, I had 450 instances of someone using the same link. Obviously excluded these immediately. Then you're all probably aware of CAPTCHA. So CAPTCHA, for those who are not aware, are those, when you have to tick a box that says, I'm not a robot, or more recently in the last few years, like you have to do those annoying, like, click the square that has a bicycle, or like click the square that has a motorcycle. I tend to fail them a lot because I don't pay a lot of attention. So just because someone fails these captchas, it doesn't mean that they're a bot. The threshold that is recommended on again, Qualtrics, because this is what I've used, was 0.5. I was a bit more lenient with this as a high confidence criteria, and I said 0.6. If they're under this, they're probably a bot. Non-sophisticated bots struggle with this. Sophisticated bots can do it very easily. And something that we haven't really considered, but I saw it in one of the papers that I've included as references. Sometimes bot programmers sit down, complete the CAPTCHA themselves, and then let their bot program finish the rest of the survey. And then they start it again, complete the CAPTCHA, let the program do the rest. In the Goodrick paper, they said that they observed that this only reduced the rate of fraudulent responses temporarily, resuming previous rates after only a few minutes. So this is about the fact that bots can and will learn. Then it's a bit of a busy slide, but don't worry about the numbers. Duplicate and spam responses. So again, this is stuff that is embedded within the software that you're going to be using, and it assesses respondent metadata, so things like browser, operating system, to identify participants that complete it more than once. Again, real people could fail this for whatever reason. You know, someone might open the survey on Chrome, start it, maybe forget about it, and then a week later open it on Firefox and then complete it there. Will they come up as duplicate? Yes. Are they a bot? No. And interestingly, even though these are supposed to be based on roughly the same sort of technical things, in my sample, I didn't identify the same respondents across all of these things. So do use them carefully. Another good one is whether they complete the survey unusually fast. So my survey was roughly 15 minutes long. I said, if they completed it in under 3 minutes, there's no way a person could be doing that unless they're literally just clicking through without reading anything. And in that case, you probably wouldn't want them in your data anyway. It does work for less sophisticated bots only, and you'll probably hear me repeating this a lot. There are sort of guidelines in the literature about what counts as too fast. So some people say 2 standard deviations above or below the mean completion time. I ended up not doing this because my sample was pregnant and postpartum women. Someone might start the study and then have a crying baby to deal with, and then only come back to the study, you know, half an hour later or like a day later. Just because they took such a long time, it doesn't mean that they're a bot. So I didn't want to use the mean completion time in this case. Similarly, bots learn, and then the longer they have access to the study, they learn what the mean sort of believable completion time would be and start matching that. So this is why I said, if it gets infiltrated, close the link down. Identical durations for study completion time. So if they're completing it in exactly the same time to the second as consecutive entries, so you have 2 responses completed in like 2 minutes, 43 seconds and 42 milliseconds, that doesn't really happen by chance. If they provide answers to what's called the honeypot question, so honeypots are questions that are invisible to human participants, but they're visible to bots. And if someone completes that, obviously they can't be a human because they wouldn't have seen that question. The issue is that they know that they can identify that this is a honeypot question. None of the bots in my survey fell for this. It might be still worth adding it because it's no extra work for the human participants. Then I've excluded people who stopped completing the survey after the first few questions. In my ethics, this was what I would have done anyway, so I interpret that as withdrawing from the study. But for bots, this is often they reach the question that they're not able to answer, so they're exiting. So now for medium confidence criteria, so again, things that may be bots, but we're not 100% sure. I used more conservative versions of the strategies that I've already described. So a CAPTCHA that was sort of slightly higher if they finished the survey, if they exited it before the end. But again, this could be a real person that is a bit done with the survey, doesn't want to finish it. If they finish the survey between 3 and 5 minutes, which is still quite fast, or if the duration was the same for entries that were not consecutive. So someone answered on Monday and finished in, 2 minutes, 55 seconds, 43 milliseconds, and someone else did on Tuesday with exactly the same timing. If they had exactly the same start time, so started at, 2:05:03, and then someone else did exactly the same, or within 5 seconds and you had a big block, that's usually quite a good indicator as well. And I also looked at the end time being the same. This worked quite well. So you can see in my first link, which is the one that was infiltrated by the highest number of bots before I implemented all of these strategies, I got most of the bots with this strategy because they complete in blocks. If they did, I also looked at duration because literature said to do that if the duration is too long. Didn't distinguish in the slightest between bots and real people. And literature also said that if you are limiting recruitment to a specific geographic location, to keep an eye on middle of the night responses because you might not be real people. This is based on the assumption that if you're doing your research in the global north, programmers will potentially come from different regions of the world. I don't necessarily agree with you. I looked at it regardless because that's what the literature tested. But again, with my sample being newly postpartum moms, someone completing a survey at 2 a.m. when they must be, breastfeeding or up with a baby that's crying, doesn't mean they're a bot. And another good one is looking at similar responses for multiple choice questions. So bots sometimes do, less sophisticated bots will do something called straight lining, which is they kind of go through and select the exact same answer C across every single question. Quite easy to spot. Or they might choose different responses, but then you might have a whole block of people choosing the exact same pattern. So when you scroll through your data, it will actually be quite visible just scrolling through your spreadsheet. Having reverse scored items can help with this because then you can actually look at it in a bit more detail. Then attention check questions. So things like, please select strongly agree to indicate that you're paying attention to this question, or please select non-applicable to this question. They can catch bots early in the recruitment process, but they quickly learn what the correct answers are and become less detectable the longer they have access to these links. I've also added an attention question that's a bit random, which is the I was born on planet Earth image. This was because it was suggested that bots are incapable of decoding images of distorted text. So if they see it in text-based form, they can answer it. If it's in an image, they might struggle with that. And also it's quite a random question, so they might struggle to answer it as well. Wasn't a particularly good indicator for me. I don't know if this is because people were, for the lack of a better word, taking the piss a bit and just kind of getting a bit annoyed with all these attention check questions and being a bit like, oh, no, I wasn't born on planet Earth, like, leave me alone. So I actually had quite a lot of real participants, joke answering these questions as well. And then I looked at things like, do answers that should match. So I asked for both age and year of birth. And then you can actually do the math and see if that math. But yeah, again, real people may fail attention checks as well. And then you can have responses that contradict each other or do not make sense. Use these incredibly careful because they could be real people. So for my example, if people reported giving birth more times than they've been pregnant, so if they said, I've been pregnant twice, how many times did you give birth? 6 times. It's like, okay. Or people who reported, both themselves and their partner were pregnant. It could happen, could have an LGBTQ couple that happens to be pregnant at the same time, but some of them had the exact same gestational age. So they were like, oh yeah, we're both 12 weeks pregnant. It's like, okay, again, debatable. And from a subjective standpoint, to me, this was a very good indicator, responses that are somewhat odd or unusual. So I gave the volatile organic compounds example already, and I've already shown the kind of block structure of open-ended questions as well. So lastly, green flags, so things highly likely to be real people. So I had quite a lot of things that I've marked as real flags, and they made me feel quite confident kind of going through it manually. Again, this is a sample of 700 people. It was a huge amount of work to manually go through all of these and determine whether I believe them or not. And you obviously have to work with your team so that it's not just based on one person's subjective decision. If you work with larger data sets than this, even 700 was pushing it. If you work with very large data sets, like you might end up getting to a point where like, I can't, this is not a feasible amount of work to do. So again, this is why we want to prevent them in the first place. So I'm going to let
I have one question, which is we're kind of operating on Chatham House rules, so you can speak freely, but is there a general recognition by people, researchers in, doing the survey research, that this is a problem and that they're willing to not only accept it as a problem, but even critically reflect on maybe some of the databases they've collected in the past, and maybe this has been infiltrated, or maybe it's such a recent issue that retrospective reflection isn't required?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. I think because we were talking about this the other day. I think when you have a massive infiltration of bots, examples like ours where 70% of your data is bots, you're going to be forced by the circumstances to look into it and be aware of it and exclude them, etc. If you have lower rates of bot infiltration, it's very likely you might not notice, especially because they're so good at mimicking real participants. So no, my answer would be no. And this is the reason why Phoebe and I are talking about this, because we feel like people are not aware of it in the first place.
Yeah.
Firstly, thank you for not doing a research paper. I can already see bots replying using foul language so that they will pass through the test. But I've got a curious question. I myself have done a few of these research answers to research because I've got friends doing research. I thought I'll help them, I'll do them. But all these, the CAPTCHA questions and tick boxing, oh my God, I get so frustrated. How many traffic lights can I identify? Seriously. And giving identity fraud is at such high risk level. I do not want to give that information in. So all the things you're already asking is an X for me. I'm not going to go there. So my ultimate question is a 20-pound Amazon voucher going to get somebody going through the bot to try and get a 20-pound voucher? Can we just not give a voucher? Can we not give any gift at all and get genuine participants?
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing that we've noticed. I think it's hard because our study was asking a lot of people's time. But yes, we could do that. I think the literature does say, though, that bots can get trained on these studies. And yeah, I think it's still important to clean your data. Like we did still have students who did the study more than once because they wanted to change questions.
Yeah, and I think what is interesting is when I did my analysis, I automatically assumed bots as in not real people. Whereas when I talked to Phoebe about it, I realized that there's actually a lot of real people also completing it for, getting to the voucher as well. So you have to be aware that the danger is sort of multifaceted. So it's not just online programs.
I think
the study itself is quite intense.
Yeah.
And then you have to filter out
Yeah.
the bots. Just can't work.
Yeah.
yeah.
Who's next? I've lost track. I'm lost without the queue system on Teams.
Hi. I was curious. So at the beginning, you mentioned that the online data collection has the benefit of it being fast, low cost, and less of a burden on participants. And then obviously by the end, we see that actually, no, it's not that fast for you guys, and it's no longer low cost because they took all of your money and then you didn't get your data. And actually the burden on participants is pretty high, it seems. And when would you say, is there a point at which it's not worth doing online? And in fact, you spend that money on being in person with somebody, at least in a video chat or actually in person?
Yeah, I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head with that. I'm at a very pessimistic viewpoint now, which is that large language models, so things like ChatGPT, are going to make online surveys impossible. That is my personal viewpoint. And I was scrolling through some of the online questions, which I'm aware that there's so many questions, we're not going to have time to get to all of them, and I'll do my best to answer them in text after this talk. So if anyone in this room also has questions that we don't get to, pop them in the online chat, and I can try and answer them. Yeah, someone online was actually making the point that it's quite common in low resource settings for someone like a healthcare worker to use the same computer to do the survey, because the population doesn't have access to computers, and those people would then be flagged as bots because they're using the same system. So yeah, I guess the takeaway is there's no one solution, and online surveys are doomed. Sorry.
I mean, we took that into account. We didn't block using the same IP address because we thought, well, we'll get a lot of students. They are probably using the same computers at uni. And again, with postcodes, if it's student accommodation, they were getting flagged as high risk because they were all putting the same accommodation, but we had someone manually checking it. So yeah, it cost us a lot of time, but to be careful to not take out people who were real participants.
Why don't you just, this is just my view, if you ran it in a hospital somewhere reliable, I'm like, okay, I trust the hospital, number one, and do it in person, forget the incentive, people will come. Because I'll be like, okay, King's College Hospital, fine, I understand, I trust the place, even if they take my data. Problem is online, no, flag one. All these issues, information, no. But if I come in person, you've already got my data, all right?
I think that's a good
You
suggestion.
bypassed everything there.
Yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion for studies that are sort of geographically restrained. For my study, I was interested in a population across the UK. So for me to do that, so for example, I was interested in how, perinatal services might differ between London and, the north of Scotland. You can, but this study that I ran was I got a £2,000 grant from King's to run it. It was a very low resource study. I just put a survey online. For me to get 100 hospitals to partner with me and do this in person would be like millions of pounds rather than £2,000. So that's just something to keep in mind.
To also quickly add, if you don't mind, was our study was all about detecting young people in the community who were experiencing emerging symptoms of psychosis. These are people who haven't gone to a healthcare provider to seek help. We were trying to see if the aim of this study really is to create a tool that we could disseminate where young people who are struggling, if they're Googling online symptoms, they could then take part in this screener, and then we could signpost them to specialized services. So yeah, we specifically were trying to find people through social media, which unfortunately was also our downfall.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that.
My question is, like, I'm sort of optimistic about it actually, because I guess now the issue is that it's so time consuming and it wastes a lot of money to manually filter through bots and stuff. But obviously we have bots that are doing the surveys, but could we not also train bots to filter out the bots in the surveys, which is one thing. And then also my other thing is sort of to answer to you that people don't want to do surveys of M&S vouchers and it's too long and they don't want to give their data. But I think at the end of the day, it's optional, and you are going to find people who want to give their postcode and who want to get the voucher. So I think that's sort of like, you're always going to find people who will do it. It's not forced,
Yeah, so I actually had a slide on this, but I skipped it because we were running over time. So one of the suggestions that I got from ChatGPT was that you can use AI to look at response pattern analysis. I think I'm glad you're optimistic. I think I'm still pessimistic myself, because I think then it turns into a bots answering questions and then other robots deciding if those are real people or not. And then it just kind of leaves the researcher fully out of it. And I think I'm just skeptical whether we can then trust that whole process to be all robot run and generated. But yeah, thank you everyone. I know we didn't get through all of the questions. And yeah, come along, chat at lunch with us, and then we can answer online as well after lunch. Thank you.
Well, Brian, we'll